Hi everyone, and welcome back as I take a look at the final episode of Ultraviolet. Well, CIB's special guest is still in his cell. Mike receives a tape from Jacob with electronic voice on the tape because Jacob has crossed over and he's now a vampire. In hiding, you could say, with Kirsty, but she's not aware that he's a vampire. And Jacob wants a meeting with Mike. Now, Mike is obviously concerned that he is with Kirsty. Meanwhile, back at headquarters, the usual interrogation backwards and forwards with their guest is underway. It's a pack of lies spliced in with some of the truth, and it goes backwards and forwards, the exchange, basically. Anyway, Mike meets Frances. He persuades her to look at Jacob's computer at work, which she does, extracts his deleted files, but there's nothing particularly of interest there. Mike meets Vaughn, who also turns up, and they basically get together trying to find out who this guy is, this Jacob is, let's say. And eventually they do come across his premises. They break in and they discover there was activity of vampirism, and he has a file on Mike, but it's all old and out-of-date stuff. Meanwhile, Kirsty now comes face to face with the truth about Jacob as she stumbles across him in a car park below the offices, which haven't gone online yet, and he has been feeding on a guard. She's absolutely horrified and shocked and taken back, but for some reason she calms down and accepts Jacob for what he has become, which is very peculiar. Very, very peculiar. Anyway, Mike and Frances have unravelled CIB's special guest. His name is Paul Hoyle. Used to work in the nuclear industry, then went green and was involved in a clean-up at Chernobyl, where he contracted radiation poisoning and passed over to the vampire side. So they now know who their guest is. Meanwhile, Mike meets Jacob. Jacob says that he wants the flask containing Angie's husband. That's all. Simple as that. And he's quite prepared to let Kirsty go. Meanwhile, Piers and Paul are having a exchange of words, and the vampire Paul is sort of winding up Piers, you could say, because he knows that Piers has cancer himself. And this exchange just goes on and on. And this does not please Vaughn, because Piers has dismissed the guards. Vaughn is absolutely livid. He gets hold of the recording. Obviously, the recording only has Pierce's voice on it, not the vampire. So he's only hearing the questions and maybe some of the answers. And he finds out that Pierce is taking medication. He confronts Angie about it. She tells him everything about his condition, and he's going to take this medication once this case is closed. Now, meanwhile, Mike is in the vault, and he ascertains a flask from the vault. Now, Mike, being Mike, has he extracted Angie's husband out the vault, or someone else? Anyway, Angie and Vaughn confront Pierce about this exchange he had with the vampire Paul. Pierce is not too happy that they broke into his office, you could say, confronting him. And he basically turns around, look, you want to run scans over me, feel free. Look for any bite marks, because you're not going to find any. And so the confrontation fizzles out. And this, in turn, leads us to the conclusion of this particular story. So, as we come to the conclusion of this story, Francis has been picked up by Vaughn and Angie because Francis has also uncovered information about Paul Hoyle and brought back to their headquarters, where she meets Paul Hoyle just before Pierce pulls a gun out and shoots him. And of course, the inevitable happens. He explodes, and she is absolutely stunned in what she has just witnessed. Yes, she has just witnessed an extermination of a vampire, which has taken her back. I think the reason she was brought into the headquarters is because she was snooping around and her activities resulted in her being picked up. So, Mike meets Jacob later in the evening on a bridge. He's under surveillance by Piers, Angie and Vaughn. Vaughn has in fact got a sniper rifle on him, tracking him, and they're waiting to see what is coming about. And what is coming about is basically Mike hands over the flask to Jacob. Now, Jacob believes inside this flask is the remains of Angie's husband. What happens next is the answer which CIB have been after. How do vampires come back? And just before this happens, Pierce turns up and he basically says to Mike, yep, they want peace, all right. They want it on their terms. A nuclear winter with synthetic blood to get them through the period of the nuclear winter, and then they can just waltz straight in and take over. And that will be the end of us. We will be their cattle. Anyway, it's a bit of a struggle. Jacob gets hold of the flask. He opens it up. He opens one of his veins and blood comes out over the powder. Now, obviously, Angie is staring directly down at these events of what's going on down on the bridge. She wants to see what's going to happen, and she basically is telling Vaughn, don't pull the trigger, don't pull the trigger, don't pull the trigger. What happens is something very peculiar happens to this ash blood, dry blood, whatever it is, that remains of, we assume, is Angie's husband. There is a reaction. Anyway, Vaughn decides to act. He shoots Jacob. Jacob is eliminated. And then there's this big swirling cloud that suddenly appears, and it is a vampire coming back, and that vampire is Mike's former partner. What he did, he swapped the flasks. It's not Angie's husband, it's Mike's former partner, who he eliminated in the very first episode. His partner cannot believe that he has returned. He sees Kirsty and tells her, get a life. And then he just jumps over the bridge. So CIB now knows how vampires come back into being. The case is now closed. Pierce is now taking his medication. Angie is sort of stunned and numb that what unfolded on the bridge. But for her, at least, it wasn't her former husband that Mike stole from the vault. Anyway, Mike bumps into his former colleague. His former colleague says, stay out of trouble and I'll stay out your way, and so on. Bit peculiar. Very strange. And that's it. That's basically where the story ends. So Francis has been released. Kirsty's been released. Vaughn wanted Mike kicked out, but Piers decided to keep him on. So there we go. That was it. It's a 6-part series. It never progressed beyond that, which is a shame, really, because it was a very good series. And on that note, have a great day. Catch you in due course. Goodbye.